Venat is one of the most polarizing characters in Final Fantasy XIV. She's given several different motivations, from mankind needing to accept suffering to know happiness, to needing to be less etherically dense to interact with Dynamis, to needing to close a time loop, which are contradictory under scrutiny. The latter two undermine the moral explanation for her actions if the sundering was always necessary. The final one creates a paradox, and while Alexander is a similar situation, it is self-contained. In Endwalker, it's not only the foundation of the lore as a whole, but a fundamental part of both the current and future setting. Read nearly any discussion about Venat, and you'll see people posit different reasons they've interpreted as the real explanation. Of the two major events that have occurred in Atheris' history, she chose non-intervention during the first, and was directly responsible for the second, despite having foreknowledge of their devastation. Even if you believe her justified, characters responsible for the amount of harm she's caused aren't put on a pedestal in 14, so she stands out as an anomaly. When a writer chooses to insist a character is objectively righteous, if there are people they can't bring on board with that outlook, it causes dissonance. The mind is repulsed by any disparity between what it is being told is true and what it knows to be true. People tend to have a disproportionately negative response to controversial elements that offer no room within the media for disagreement, and the text treats Venat with unambiguous positivity despite the gray nature of her actions. It feels like the writers are demanding you abandon your values and accept theirs, or else become an unwanted player for whom the game isn't for. So why didn't this character land with everyone, when she's clearly meant to be the star of the show? Let's start with the reasons for the sundering, as established in the Lore Q&A live letter. Venat believed the Ancients, being so dense in ether, could not control Dynamis, and thus could not have stopped the final days at its source. She also believed the Ancients were unable to change as a people, and the Plenty section of the Dead End's dungeon is cited as the writer's vision of what probably would have happened if the Ancients had continued as they were. We'll begin with Dynamis. The primary issue with Dynamis compared to Ether is we understand the latter fairly well, having dealt with it extensively, while Dynamis is introduced at the 11th hour, is critical to the plot, and lacks any rules or clear display of what it even is or does. First and foremost, it's imperative we clear up the misconception that the Ancients were wholly incapable of interacting with Dynamis, as this is factually incorrect.
Reflect the emotional state, you say? By what means do they achieve this?
In creation, there exists an energy wholly apart from ether, one driven by emotions. In like manner to how we manipulate ether, this flower is subject to the influence of said energy.
Hermes later says the Ancients cannot readily manipulate Dynamis due to their etheric concentration, not that it's impossible for them to do so. Dynamis is an energy put in motion by feelings. His ability to change the color of the Elpis flowers is proof they could interact with Dynamis. As the Warrior of Light demonstrates, it takes being in close proximity to the blossoms and a focus on intense emotion to change their color, otherwise they react to the prevailing emotion in the vicinity. This is shown to still be the case for the Sundered when we're introduced to the heart blooms in Labyrinthos. Plus, if the Elpis flower in Emet-Selch is the basis for determining interaction with Dynamis, then Meteion could also be taken as evidence, since she reacts to the intense feelings of those around her. Additionally, with Endsinger's implication that the Warrior of Light's use of Limit Break 3 during the phase transition of her fight as Dynamis, then Emet-Selch, Hythlodaeus, and Venat could all Limit Break, as shown in Khatice's Hyperborea, with Elidibus and Seed of Sacrifice being capable of Limit Break 4. Second, given the existence of Meteion, the Ancients were capable of creating beings that could manipulate Dynamis. Hythlodaeus comments, "'Tis a shame there is no registered concept we could use to create another Meteion, assuming of course we could link her to the shared mind, so there were possibilities that weren't explored. There are many speculative options. Something akin to Khatice's Hyperborea's field of dampening could have been used to suppress their creation magics, which was their only vulnerability to the Song of Oblivion. Pandemonium introduced the potential of self-sundering, as well as the concept of the Hemetheos, a project focused on melding with creations, which could theoretically include an Emet-Selch. The ability to become primals who could traverse the stars such as Shinryu, not to mention, how did we get to Ultima Thule? An astronomical amount of ether, with ancient-made familiars that were capable of building and piloting spaceships. It comes across as a contrivance that the problem is completely unsolvable to them, since Meteion is an ancient creation. Hermes said it was an esoteric field, not that he was the only scholar. The final days would have necessitated research devoted to Dynamis, and they had a minimum of 12,000 years of safety provided by an unsundered zodiac shield in which to devise a solution. Venat considered Dynamis important enough to be half of her reasoning for decimating the ancients, and yet the Sundered are no more adept in or knowledgeable about it than the ancients were. The botanist in Labyrinthos tells us, even with the collected wisdom of Charlian at our disposal, we've yet to identify the underlying principle of this empathic effect, and Nidhana's words echo Hermes before we even meet him.
Akasha can neither be created nor destroyed. It is beyond our power to purposefully alter or manipulate. But even for us, Akasha is a somewhat abstract field of study. A lack of practical application lends itself poorly to formalized research.
Consider what the Sundering did to mankind in terms of Dynamis. The Sundered are significantly more susceptible to the final days, not only in terms of becoming blasphemies, but in causing chain reactions. Meteion comments in Ultima Thule that the Sundered are easily unmade, and the Scions are only returned at the end through the use of ancient magics. The short story, A Question of Life, also indicates being too susceptible to Dynamis is dangerous. Meteion rose to her feet and dutifully delivered the report in her halting voice. Her sister had been caught in a raging torrent of Dynamis, she explained, and subsequently unmade, like so many others before. As a being of Dynamis, Meteion could survive in most any environment by reducing her constituent ether to a bare minimum, yet by the same token, being made of Dynamis rendered Meteion vulnerable to its influence. Though its potential was suppressed on ether-rich Aetheris, it behaved in unexpected ways in the void beyond, ways that confused and confounded her. Then there's the problem with Dynamis philosophically, when half of the reason for the eradication of the ancients is based on inherent characteristics, essentially saying as a race of people, they were fundamentally wrong, biologically inadequate, and in need of non-consensual fixing at the behest of someone else's judgment. The suggestion of the way they were born was innately inferior, and using that as a means of justifying their extinction in favor of a superior mankind, based in part on Venat's interactions with one person who is exceptional among the Sundered, becomes deeply concerning, as the Sundering then becomes about eugenics. This is a plot element in the Endwalker sage quests. The antagonist seeks to forcefully alter mankind, to evolve, and yet he is opposed in the strictest terms and treated as a villain. Addendum as of 6.4. This is also precisely what Athena, the villainess of the Pandemonium raids, sought to do. She says, "My theory was that any true god would see us as we are, imperfect. She would hammer out our flaws and build something greater. To prove this could not but benefit the star, I would give it the perfect stewards, that it might shine brighter than any other." To which Eric replies, "And you would destroy the lives already upon it." More on their parallels later. There was also an element of social Darwinism within 6.0 that Ishikawa had to walk back in Omega Beyond the Rift, which incidentally unraveled part of Venat's motives. Venat wished for mankind to develop a means to overcome despair, believing that by sundering all of creation, mankind had the potential to see it fulfilled by accepting suffering as their constant companion. However, in Thavnir, this idea is rejected. Omega concludes succumbing to the Song of Oblivion is arbitrary, illogical, and based on individual perspective, which couldn't be attributed to one's fortitude, strength, or composition, as well as the premise of someone having a greater ability against despair being wrong to begin with. Putting aside everything I've outlined, there's one crucial sticking point as to whether or not Dynamis was truly a factor in the ability to overcome Meteion, and that is, if the ancients had changed, had forged ahead to Venat's satisfaction, would she have sundered them? Because if the answer is yes, then all of her outreach was merely a ruse.